Ah, what was I expecting? Of course the Ogre Grunts are already here.
If you were playing VR games 5 years ago, you might remember a little game from Carbon Studios called The Wizards. There wasn't a ton of content, and you could tell that it had some pretty basic wave shooter roots. But it let you be a wizard and cast cool spells, not by selecting them from a menu, but instead by just moving your hands in certain ways. Unfortunately, PSVR1 owners never got the sequel, the game we're talking about today, The Wizard's Dark Times Brotherhood, which delivers a much more cohesive campaign and a separate multiplayer roguelite mode as well. It's hard not to be a little disappointed right off the bat with Brotherhood's last-gen resolution and frame rate. And listen, I don't want to kick off this review with a conspiracy theory, but I'm gonna. Steam reviews all say the same thing, that this game used to be beautiful until the Quest version came out, and then apparently, the developers downgraded the visuals to match the standalone version. It sounds crazy, I know, but I've heard from developers firsthand that Meta hates all those graphics comparison videos you see on YouTube, because the Quest really can't compete with PCVR and PSVR2. So it doesn't seem out of the question that Meta stepped in, and as a result, we got the Quest version over here too, with lots of aliasing and frame rate drops when shit hits the fan. The worst part is that there are moments when the frame rate is super smooth that show us just how good the game could look if it was optimized properly. I will say some of the environments still look good with plenty of detail, nice lighting effects, and no load times when teleporting between areas. But others look downright bad. And unfortunately, we can't even move on yet without mentioning that the audio has its own set of problems as well. Peaceful areas sound peaceful, the battles sound intense, and then suddenly the music will just cut out completely for seemingly no reason at all. It just goes to show you how little care and quality control was put into this port.
We have company!
The campaign, which is single player only, despite what you might have seen elsewhere, is fairly short, clocking in around 4 hours, and feels really arcadey. There's something about this that just feels like a VR version of an old Capcom side-scrolling beat-em-up. You know, mostly linear with a few secrets for those who are looking to explore, and not an MP bar in sight, meaning that you can cast spells constantly. And if you're like me and you just spent 50 plus hours in Legendary Tales, this is a nice change of pace, especially since casting is all gesture-based. Pull the trigger and flip your hand to conjure up a fireball. Pull the triggers and slam your hands together to conjure an ice bow. Then grab the bow and rip it apart to make 2 swords. It feels great to do when you do it successfully. Way too often I found myself pulling up my shield in the heat of battle when I'm meant to conjure fire. Now it's hard to tell if it's me flailing around in the heat of battle or the game simply not recognizing my basic movements properly. I've experimented with more dramatic and deliberate hand gestures and it's still happening. Plus I asked around and it's not just me, so I think we're gonna blame the game here. And if you're scoffing at the idea of a 4-hour campaign, well, let me tell you this. Half of me thinks that, yeah, it's a pretty short game. And the other half of me was so glad that it ended when it did. See, you learn new spells pretty frequently and rapidly progress through different environments, taking on bosses and slowly discovering the minimal and thankfully unobtrusive story. And I really enjoyed discovering these puzzle chests along the way that you need to search the environments in order to unlock. But Dark Times relies far too much on extending the playtime by throwing enemies at you every time you do anything. Enter a new room, kill some enemies, pull a switch, kill some enemies, kill some enemies, kill some enemies. It's constant and predictable, and it gets old by the halfway mark. In fact, more than any technical issues that the game has, this is what killed all of the fun for me eventually. Just to give you an idea of how frustrating it is, usually when I hear that a game has a short campaign, I'll play it in 1, maybe 2 sittings. But with Dark Times, it took me literally days of playing in short 45-minute spurts, because A, it just wasn't fun, and B, every time I put the game down, I had zero desire to go back and play more. And to be completely clear here, for the first hour or so, I was really invested, thinking that, yeah, maybe with a little more polish, this could be a great game, but as is, it's still pretty good. But by the time I hit hour 3, despite all the cool new powers I was getting, I just didn't care anymore, and even considered giving up entirely. The multiplayer roguelite mode is a different animal entirely, allowing 1 to 3 players to head out together. Now what makes this mode interesting is an experience system that gradually unlocks different skills as you progress, meaning the more you play, the more powerful your character becomes. AJ and I checked this mode out for a while, and holy shit, the in-game voice chat is so loud.
Let me ride the darkness.
Why would it be this loud? None of the options in-game, including the slider for the voice chat volume, made a difference. It is fun though, and I even spent some time playing this mode by myself, which I don't recommend. Now, compared to all the other roguelike games we have on PSVR2, this one's pretty weak and is really, really bare bones by comparison. Now, don't get me wrong, it's cool that there's a multiplayer mode here, but why wasn't the multiplayer and skill tree stuff just included in the main campaign? It kind of feels like Carbon made two different games and then smashed them together, which is actually exactly what happened.
Ooh, that was close. Oh, man.
God, what was I expecting? Of course the ogre grunts are already there.
I've got to give Carbon Studios credit for trying to give Dark Times a more cohesive campaign than their first outing. And despite the rough port, I was actually having a good time for the first hour or so. But eventually the monotony sets in. The endless waves of enemies become a chore rather than engaging, and the gesture-based spellcasting simply isn't reliable enough to make it feel like second nature. And then when you add in the poor port, with the rough graphics, audio, and frame rate, I think I'd rather play the original.